What is the difference between a Spring MVC interceptor and a web filter? A Spring MVC interceptor works within the Spring framework to handle HTTP requests before and after they reach the controller. It helps with tasks like logging or authentication. A web filter, on the other hand, is more general and works at a lower level. It filters requests before they reach any servlet, handling tasks like security or data compression for all the parts of the web application. Discuss exception handling in Spring MVC. In Spring MVC, we can handle exceptions using exception handler methods in our controller for local handling and controller advice for global handling across multiple controllers. We can also use handler exception resolver to create custom ways to resolve exceptions. These features help us manage errors in a flexible and organized way throughout our Spring MVC application. How can you configure a global exception handler using @controller advice? To set up a global exception handler in Spring MVC, create a class and annotate it with @controller advice. Inside this class, add methods with an exception handler annotation specifying which exceptions they handle. These methods will manage exceptions for all controller in our app, providing a centralized way to handle errors consistently. What is the use of @exception handler? @exception handler is used in Spring MVC to handle errors in controller methods. If a method throws an exception, another method with @exception handler will be called to manage the errors. This lets us create custom responses for different types of errors. We can use @exception handler in a specific controller or in a global class with @controller advice to handle errors for all controllers. How does a Spring MVC differentiate between different types of exceptions? Spring MVC uses the @exception handler annotation to tell different types of exceptions. Apart from each method with @exception handler specifies the exception it handles. When an exception occurs, Spring MVC finds the matching @exception handler method for that exception type and runs it. This lets us handle different exceptions in specific ways. What are the options for implementing security in a Spring MVC applications? In a Spring MVC application, we can secure it by using Spring Security. This tool helps with login, user roles, and protecting against attacks like CSRF. We can set up with Java code or XML, use annotations like @enable web security and @secured annotation to secure methods. We can also use auth2 for single sign-on, JWT for token-based security, and customize who can access what the roles and permissions. How does Spring Security integrate with Spring MVC? Spring Security integrates with Spring MVC by setting up security rules through Java code or XML. We enable it with @enable web security and configure it by extending web security configurer adapter. This setup handles login, user roles, and session management. It uses filters to check security before requests reach our controllers, ensuring only authorized users can access our application. What are the common challenges when securing a Spring MVC application? Securing a Spring MVC application involves several challenges. These includes ensuring users are who they say they are, that is authentication, and have permissions to access certain resources, that is authorization. Protecting against attacks like XSS and CSRF is also important. Using HTTPS for secure communication, encrypting sensitive data, keeping sessions secure, preventing SQL injection, and keeping security settings up to date are all key tasks. Regularly updating the software helps protect against new vulnerabilities. Can you describe the configuration steps necessary for method level security? To set up method level security in a Spring application, add at enable global method security in our configuration class. Use annotations like at pre-authorize, at post-authorize, at secured annotation, or at roles allowed annotation on our methods to control access. Create a secure configuration class that extends web security configurer adapter and set up authentication and authorization details. Make sure the security context is configured to manage user roles and permissions. Explain the concept of dependency injection in the context of Spring MVC. Dependency injection in Spring MVC is a way to make our code cleaner and easier to manage. Instead of creating objects manually, we tell Spring that we need and it provides those objects for us. This makes our code less dependent on specific implementations and easier to test and maintain. Spring's container takes care of creating and injecting the required objects what we needed.